Hey everybody, it's me Aaron and welcome back to Lloyd's Comics Collectibles, and this week we are finally going to conclude Beast Wars with Season 3. The last season, sorry again it took me so long, because I have to make screenshots of everything and cut that all down so it takes time. But we're finally here to cover it, and as always the disclaimers are, if you hadn't seen Season 3, we're going to go over the main plot of it. So if you don't want it spoiled, stop the video. Maybe through YouTube's weird algorithm you found Season 3 first. Also, there are some minor arcs in this series, in this season that are good, but I'm only going to try to stick to things that directly affect the main story as far as the review goes, because I'm assuming you guys have seen it. I might mention it in passing, but I'm not going to go into detail on a lot of those. And if you hadn't and you still watch all this, you're probably a person who doesn't mind spoilers. They're still worth, watching the whole season. So this will not be a in-depth, all 13 episode dive. Okay, so last time we left off with our intrepid heroes in a bit of a bind, as Megatron's plans had apparently come to fruition, and he had fatally wounded Optimus Prime. Now pay attention to the words I'm using, because I will be referring to Optimus Prime, which is G1 leader of the Autobots, and Primal, who is the leader of the Maximals. Pay close attention, because that can get confusing. And I'm sorry, but it's their names. So anyway, he had fatally wounded him. Time was in flux. There's this big whirly time tornado thing, and the Autobots were sort of blinking in and out of existence, or fading out of existence, because if you kill off Optimus Prime, presumably the Autobots lose the war. That changes the whole scope of things, and Decepticons being Decepticons, I guess they destroy all the Autobots. So you would not, by extension, have Maximals. Okay. So we're at this point, the time vortex is spinning around, Megatron's gloating, and Black Arachnia activates Teletran 1 and expels Megatron from the Ark. This buys them enough time to rush over and start repairing Optimus Prime. Now the problem is, Rhinox tells us that even with the repair tech they have on board, Prime's spark will go out due to the sheer trauma of the repair process. This leaves Optimus Primal no choice but then to risk containing Prime's spark inside of his own body while the repairs go down. Of course, this is ludicrous because Prime's spark is special and super powerful, I believe, because of the Matrix leadership. Don't hold me to that. I've never watched all of G1. It's probably on my list, but I've never, as a kid, seen it all. So it's not recommended for anybody to have two sparks in their bodies, let alone one, the power of Optimus Prime. So Primal takes the spark into himself. They start repairing Optimus. They initiate the repair program. The problem is, this is X amount of millions of year old tech at this point. I think Black Arachnia says 4 million years old. It takes time. So Prime is containing this spark, and it begins to warp and change his body. And, it changes into this gigantic robot that still sort of has monkey features, but in this season he's got Beast Mode, which is a monkey, which you can barely tell apart from his regular mode. So Beast Mode, Bot Mode, Tank Mode, and Plane Mode. So his new form has 4 modes. So you can tell we were really pushing toys, which, the Optimal Optimus toy was pretty cool. From when I played with, I think when my friends had it. So while they're still running repairs on Prime, while they're still running repairs on Optimus Prime, Megatron decides this is a great opportunity to attack the Maximal ship, the Axelon, because it's unguarded, because all the Maximals were here trying to save Optimus Prime. In his new form, Primal decides to take Cheetor to try to intercept, to stop the Predacons from... the Predacons. Thought I said Decepticons. The Predacons from destroying the Axelon. Okay, the only problem is when they join the battle ensues, Prime is also carrying... Primal is also carrying Prime Spark. See, I did it. And it's in his little cockpit thing in his stomach, so when Tarantula whenever they try to shoot him, He has to deflect the shot to save Prime Spark. It flies off, hits the rocks, explodes. Yaxlon snaps in half, and the ship plummets into the lake below. So this forces the Maximals to sort of build a base and defenses around the Ark. But other than that, they go back, and Primal returns Prime Spark to him, and this stabilizes the timeline. But this sort of sets the scene for our season, where the Maximals don't really have free reign to go out and like attack or things like that. They have to stay defensive, because if Megatron destroys the Ark or destroys Prime, it's all over. So keep that in mind. That's our main arc for the season, is his continued attempts to try to destroy, the Maximals and Prime and all that stuff. Our next episode that we're going to talk about has a lone Maximal from Cybertron scanning an area in space, presumably where the time-space anomaly opened up. And he gets a signal of Protoform X's spark, and he's scanning, and as he's scanning, he's sucked into a temporal anomaly and sent back to Earth with our fellow Maximals. He crash lands and all that good stuff. And to give you the backstory, because this is a underrunning plot of his name is Depth Charge. He is he takes on the Stingray form. He's got a flight mode, but he was head of security for a colony that not Weapon X, that's Wolverine, Protoform X, aka Rampage, destroyed. And actually, Depth Charge is the one who originally apprehended Rampage. And when he petitioned the council to destroy Rampage's spark, they decided not to, or they couldn't, and handed him over to Optimus and his crew. So that's a little, point of contention in the season as we go forward. But they have a little bit of a fight, Depth Charge sort of wins for now, but Rampage scampers off to hill again. Okay, so next up we have that, back when the aliens, or as they will be called later in the season, the Valk, we finally find out what they're called, tech, that Megatron was messing with. There's a metal sphere called the Transmetal Driver that Megatron had stolen and had boosted its power, and gives him the ability to some extent to give transmetal abilities to other beings. The only problem is, without a spark, it is very unstable. So he recovers a blank, one of the Maximal blanks, and his plan, as he whisks it away to do this evil experiment, is to mix the blank with cells from the cloned Dinobot. If you remember, in one of the earlier seasons, they cloned a Dinobot that couldn't transform. And he will use the other part of Rampage's spark, because, again, he has part of Rampage's spark, and that's how he's controlled Rampage, to make a new Transmetal 2 Dinobot. And his experiment, unfortunately, succeeds, and we get what we will call T2 Dinobot. He kind of looks and sounds like Dinobot at this point, does not seem to have his memories. But when the Maxwell show up to foil this plan, Cheetor grabs the sphere, throws it to Depth Charge, and gets blasted into the energy beam where the sphere was. And this gives him a T2 form, but he has to learn to control it, because it's very feral. And there's a couple episodes, 2 episodes that go around that. But Cheetor has a new form where he's got a rocket on his back and he can run really fast, and he's super strong. And there's a good coming of age story there. Black Arachne also in this season has a lot of development, as she's sort of dealing with being a bad guy girl, but also being with the Maximals. And yes, I said bad guy girl. When I was little, that's how I used to put it to my dad. I'd call female villains bad guy girls. I don't know why, it just always cracked him up. But yeah, she's dealing with being a bad guy girl, but being a Maximal because of, with the Maximals because of Silverbolt. She also gets T2 form later in the season. It's a really good arc. It just does not pertain to the main story, so that's that. Okay, so as our season draws on, the Valk, which are the aliens that started the experiments on Earth, detect the disturbances in the time, because Megatron almost killed Prime and all these other things. So they decide to fuse the forms of Airazor and Tigertron into one being, and they give it, and then they themselves inherit this frame, and they send it through space and time, and it starts careening towards Earth. And despite everything that the Predacons do to try to stop it, they have to abandon the base or to avoid certain destruction as it crashes down, destroys their ship. This new form is called Tigerhawk. As mentioned, it's a fusion of Tigertron and Airazor. This new form can control the weather and evidently can manipulate the Earth. He proceeds to use all of his powers to sort of deal with the Decepticons. And he wants to destroy... Oh, I forgot one thing. Let me back up in my notes. Megatron also gets a new form in this season. He eventually breaks into the Ark and mingles his spark with the... He mingles his spark with the spark of G1 Megatron. And keep this in mind, because in this episode, it never shows him putting the spark back. So I think this is a big plot hole that, unless they somehow tie it all back together in Beast Machines, was a pretty big plot hole. But he has a dragon form now. Okay, so Tigertron meteors down to the planet. He's going to destroy Megatron. Optimus pleads with him not to, because he knows if you destroy Megatron, that also destroys G1 Megatron, which will cause extensive damage to the timeline, which Tigerhawk is trying to prevent. This falls on deaf ears. Tigertron opens up a small chasm in the Earth to delay Optimus or prevent him from stopping him. But their little discussion gives Tarantulas enough time to basically knock out Tigertron with like little stun versions of his little spider lamps, and he takes him back to a secret cave. In his cave, he talks to him for a bit, and he has a beam that he's going to use on Tigerhawk to try to destroy the vault. And in typical bad guy fashion, as he turns around, the vault begins to leave the body as it's being blasted with the beam and go to attack Tarantulas. And as Tarantulas turns around and reacts, he tries to shoot him. This hits the gun, which spins it around, blasts the Valk and Tarantulas until they're both presumably killed. This leaves Tigerhawk's frame empty, and Cheetor brings the combined sparks of Tigertron and Airazor to the form, and we have Tigerhawk. He's really cool design, but he's one of those things, along with Dragon, Megatron, T2 and stuff, that we don't get a whole lot of time with in the series. So and now our next thing, this is the final arc of the series. This ties everything together. The Preds are without a base, but they start scavenging around because Megatron suspects the Distractors, as Tarantulas was, he always had a backup plan. They find a secret hatch. They go down inside said hatch, open it, and then they find a submersible, and there's something underground or under the water. They get in there and start heading to it. The Maximals now can kind of go on the offensive and start looking for the Preds. Find the hatch. It's booby-trapped. The explosion goes off, collapses the entrance. Takes them time to get down there. By the time they get down there, the Megatron and Dinobot are already at their destination. It turns out Tarantulas found the Nemesis, which is the flagship of G1 Megatron. It was supposedly the strongest ship in the Decepticon armada. They're scrambling to try to raise the ship out of the ocean and use it as a weapon. Optimus figures this is probably what all this is, and sends Depth Charge, as he's the only underwater Maximal, to try and stop them, even though they will track them as best as they can from the surface. When he gets down there, Rampage is waiting for him, and this leads to their epic final showdown. They have a little bit of an exchange and a sword fight with Energon crystals, but eventually Depth Charge gets the upper hand and plunges a raw Energon crystal into Rampage's spark. Now, as you remember, up to this point, Rampage has essentially been immortal, and he is, but his spark can be damaged by a raw Energon weapon. So this causes a chain reaction. Rampage explodes, and debris floats to the surface, and we discover that to kill Rampage and hopefully destroy the Nemesis, depth charge should pay the ultimate price. But he had sort of righted his one wrong or ensured that Rampage would no longer torment the galaxy. But unfortunately, Megatron and Dinobot managed to raise the Nemesis up from under the ocean. And then we come into our final episode. Is Tigertron and Optimus, or Tigerhawk, sorry, and Optimus attack the Nemesis, do next to nothing to it. Tigerhawk volunteers to stay and buy Optimus time to rejoin the Maximals. Optimus has contacted Rhinox and told him to start Operation Eternity, which was a contingency plan he put in place should the Ark ever need to be moved, where they would move all the gear into the Ark and try to move the Ark. Tigertron faces off with the Nemesis. Despite all his weather controlling powers, can't really stop it and is destroyed. But that gives Optimus enough time to get back to his Maximal crew. Now, in this time, as they sort of finalize some preparations to start working on the Ark, Megatron turns his fury on the cave people of the planet, or the pre-humans, because he can double ensure his victory if he can ensure humans are never born, because I guess we are a big part of helping the Autobots and defeating the Decepticons in G1. But something has happened to Dinobot now that Rampage is gone, and he seems to remember his valiant last stand to protect the pre-humans in the previous season, and something doesn't feel right to him. And Megatron keeps on ramming, mindless mayhem on the ground below him, and tells Dinobot to start charging the big cannon. So they start that, and then Megatron turns a tractor beam on the mountain where the Ark is. This pulls the Ark up out of the mountain, and despite their best efforts, they can't get the Ark to go. They can't get the engines to fire up. It's been underground for so long or whatever. So, in their darkest hour, Optimus boards the Nemesis to have his final showdown with Megatron. And they go back and forth, and as they're fighting, Megatron tells Dinobot to ready the weapon to fire. And he sort of remembers his old crewmates, and he sends them a schematic of the Ark. Excuse me, guys. It reveals that the Ark has a shuttle on board, and that they can use that to escape or whatever. So he sends them those plans. Once Megatron gets the upper hand, it seems all is lost. As he orders Dinobot to fire the main cannon, Dinobot refuses, and they get into a little squabble, and Megatron casts him aside. But before he can fire the main weapon, Rhinox crashes the shuttle through the bridge of the Nemesis, hits Megatron, and takes him out the other end of the bridge. This causes catastrophic damage to the Nemesis as the bridge begins to explode and it begins to sink back down towards the ocean. Optimus pleads with his old friend Dinobot to save himself. Dinobot tells him to go, his fate's been sealed. And he salutes him, and this is the last we see as Dinobot is consumed in the explosion of the Nemesis bridge. But his last act as a Maximal was enough to buy them time. Sorry, guys, she wants to be in the video. Shh, baby. And they can now go home. They have a means to get back to Cybertron. And for some reason, they strap Megatron to the outside of the ship and use the warp drive to jump through time back to supposedly Cybertron. Now, the plot hole I was talking about here, as we get into concluding, is at no point in any of the episodes does it state that Megatron returned the spark of original G1 Megatron to G1 Megatron. So, I don't know if their sparks fused, but in my head, if this is true, them removing the spark from the planet, unless they and these machines go back and put the spark back, would have catastrophic repercussions for the descendants of the Decepticons. But maybe they'll cover that. I've got to watch all the Beast Machines, see if maybe they tie up that loose. That was a big loose end for me. And in closing here, guys, this is a show, as I told you guys, I was very fond of as a kid. I had a lot of the toys. As everything went down, I really enjoyed the nostalgia, but I found myself saddened by the fact that it didn't quite have the magic it did when I was however old I was when it came out. That's not to say I didn't enjoy it, and I don't think it would be a great show to share with, your younger brothers or siblings or children if you have them, if it was something you really loved, because it's a good show. It has good character development. It tackles things that we deal with as, kids growing up and becoming teens. It has a lot of good things in it. But I discovered as I watched the show, sometimes you never quite can recapture the luster something had as a child, but you can still go back and enjoy the memories. And as far as its animation style goes, it improved over the seasons. It got a little bit better, but it's still pretty dated CGI animation, as you can remember. But it's been a fun time to share this with you. As I said, had a bunch of the toys as a kid. They were a big part of my childhood growing up. I always loved Transformers because they were kind of that mix of action figure and puzzle. And it holds a special place in my heart, guys. And I hope if you hadn't seen it, maybe this inspired you to go check it out. 3 seasons. The longest one, I think, is the first season, and the other 2 are 13 episodes. It won't take you long to work through them. And share this with, if you know some people that are just getting into Transformers, show them some of the older stuff. Yes, this isn't G1, but I believe this was the second series that Transformers had, because I think they had the G1 and then a movie or 2, and then this was the first thing back. So it's a good part of Transformers history. And I thank you guys for spending time with me today. Click the notification bell to get notifications when I post another video. Usually it's every Friday. Follow us on all the social medias. Leave me in the comments below your favorite Transformers series or favorite Transformers toy or anything to do with Transformers or things you think I should check out. If you got any ideas on how I can make these videos better, feel free to leave it in the comments below or on the website. Also linked below. And I'll see you next time, guys. Peace.